Life can surprise you in unexpected ways. For me, Margaret, a simple question on Thanksgiving Day changed everything I thought I knew about my life. My son, a successful millionaire, asked me if I liked the lake house he had given me. The problem? I had never received any house. I never thought that a simple question on Thanksgiving would break everything I thought I knew about my life. For the past 2 years, I had been struggling to make enough money from my job as a janitor. I had to use less of my blood pressure medicine and wore the same old coat through 2 very cold winters. But I told myself it was only for a short time, that things would get better. My son, David, had built a very successful business from nothing. At 35, he owned a rich tech company that had over 200 workers. I was proud of him, even though our talks had become short phone calls about business meetings and dinners with clients. After his father died 3 years ago, David focused completely on work, and I understood. Sadness affects everyone differently. The house felt different that Thanksgiving morning. I had spent hours making his favorite foods, even though the bill for groceries would mean I would skip lunch for the next week. My small kitchen barely held all the pots and pans, but I wanted everything to be perfect for his visit. It had been 4 months since I had seen him in person. When David walked through my front door, I was amazed by how expensive everything he wore looked. His watch, his shoes, even his simple sweater probably cost more than my monthly rent. Behind him walked Victoria, his wife of 3 years. She wore a light-colored coat that looked like it belonged in a fancy magazine. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled, even with the November wind. "Mom, the house smells amazing," David said, hugging me quickly before stepping back to help Victoria with her coat. She smiled at me, that smooth smile she always wore, but her eyes seemed to be figuring something out. We sat down for dinner, and I listened as David talked about making his business bigger on the West Coast. Victoria joined in, sometimes mentioning their recent trip to Europe and the changes they were planning for their home. I nodded and smiled, even though each detail reminded me of the growing space between my life and theirs. Then, as I was serving the pumpkin pie, David leaned back in his chair and smiled. "Mom, I've been wanting to ask you something that's been on my mind." I put down the pie server, giving him my full attention. "How are you enjoying the lake house I gave you 2 years ago? I know you've always loved being near the water." The words hit me like cold water. I stared at him, my mouth slightly open, trying to understand what he had just said. Lake house. I felt my heart beat faster as confusion washed over me. "What lake house, honey? I never received any lake house." David's smile stopped. He looked at Victoria, who had become very still beside him. "The house on Lake Morrison. I had it put in your name for your birthday 2 years ago. Don't you remember?" I shook my head slowly, feeling dizzy. "David, I would remember getting a house. I've never gotten anything like that. Are you sure you're not thinking of someone else?" Victoria suddenly stood up, her napkin falling to the floor. "Oh, I just remembered," she said, her voice a little higher than usual. "I need to make a phone call about tomorrow's appointment. Excuse me." She walked quickly toward the kitchen, pulling out her phone, but something about how she moved felt wrong. It was urgent in a way that made my stomach tighten. David was frowning now, his businessman's mind clearly trying to solve a puzzle. "Mom, that's impossible. I specifically had my assistant handle all the paperwork. The deed should have been mailed to you, and there were supposed to be monthly payments set up too." "Monthly payments?" I felt my legs weaken. "What monthly payments?" "The $1,500 I've been sending you every month to help with expenses. My assistant told me you were receiving everything." The room seemed to tip. $1,500 a month for 2 years. That was $36,000. Enough to have changed everything for me. enough to buy the medicines I needed, to fix my car, to not worry about every grocery purchase. I gripped the edge of the table. David, I promise you, I haven't received any monthly payments. I've been struggling to pay for my blood pressure medicine. Last month, I had to choose between groceries and my electric bill. David's face turned white. He stood up suddenly, his chair scratching against the floor. That's impossible. I have receipts, bank transfers. Everything should be recorded. From the kitchen, I could hear Victoria's voice, low and urgent, though I couldn't understand the words. My hands started shaking as the full weight of the situation began to settle over me. "Show me," I whispered. "Show me the papers." David was already pulling out his phone, looking through emails with growing desperation. "I have copies of everything at home. The deed transfer, the payment confirmations. Mom, if you haven't been getting this money, then where has it been going?" We both turned toward the kitchen at the same moment. Victoria's voice had stopped. The silence felt heavy, full of guilt. I stood up on unsteady legs and walked toward the kitchen doorway. Victoria was standing with her back to us, phone pressed to her ear. But she wasn't talking anymore. When she heard our footsteps, she spun around, her face red. "Everything okay?" David asked, but his tone had changed. It was the voice he used in business meetings when he thought someone wasn't telling the truth. Victoria's smile looked forced. "Of course, just confirming our dinner plans for tomorrow." But I could see it now, the guilt written on her face, the way she couldn't quite look me in the eyes, the nervous way she was playing with her wedding ring. "Victoria," David said slowly, "do you know anything about the lake house paperwork? You helped coordinate with my assistant on several things around that time." The silence that followed felt endless. Victoria's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. In that moment, looking at her face, I knew, somehow, some way, she had taken what was meant for me. The Thanksgiving I'd worked so hard to make perfect was about to become the day my family fell apart. The silence in my small dining room stretched like a tight string, ready to break. Victoria stood frozen in the kitchen doorway, her perfectly cared-for hands clasped so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. David was staring at his wife with a look I'd never seen before, a mix of confusion and growing doubt. "Victoria," I said quietly, my voice steadier than I felt, "where's my lake house?" She swallowed hard, her eyes moving quickly between David and me. There must be some misunderstanding. Maybe the paperwork got lost in the mail. Or perhaps there was an error at the bank. But even as she spoke, I could see the lie forming in her eyes. After working as a janitor for 15 years, cleaning offices late at night, I'd learned to read people. You learn a lot when you're invisible to most folks, when they talk around you as if you're not there. Victoria was lying, and she wasn't very good at it. David pulled out his phone again. "I'm calling Rebecca, my assistant. She handled all of this personally." "No, wait," Victoria said quickly, stepping forward. "Maybe we should discuss this privately first. Your mother has been through a lot, and I don't want to upset her more if this is just a simple mix-up." I felt a cold anger building in my chest. Upset me more? I'd been living on crackers and peanut butter for dinner most nights while she wore expensive clothes and took trips to Europe. But I kept my voice calm. "Victoria, honey, I think we're past worrying about upsetting me. I need to know where my house is." David was already dialing. Within seconds, I heard a woman's voice on the other end. "Rebecca, it's David. I need you to pull up the paperwork for the lake house I bought for my mother 2 years ago." There was a pause. Then Rebecca's voice became clearer as David put the phone on speaker. "Of course, Mr. Harrison. The property at 1247 Lake Morrison Drive. The deed was transferred to Margaret Harrison on November 15th, 2 years ago. I have copies of all the signed documents." My heart pounded. That was my name, my address for the paperwork, but I had never signed anything. And the monthly payments? David asked. All processed as requested. $1,500 transferred on the first of every month to the account you specified. Account holder named Margaret Harrison. Routing number ending in 4782. I felt the blood drain from my face. I don't have an account ending in 4782. My account ends in 9156. David's eyes snapped to Victoria. Rebecca, can you read me the full account number? As Rebecca quickly read off the numbers, I watched Victoria's face fall apart. It wasn't my account. It wasn't even close. Rebecca, David said, his voice dangerously quiet. Who gave you this account information? Your wife, sir. Mrs. Harrison called me in December 2 years ago and said there had been a change in your mother's banking information. She provided the new routing and account numbers and asked me to update all the records. The phone slipped slightly in David's hand. Victoria made a small, desperate sound in the back of her throat. And the deed, David continued. Where was it supposed to be mailed to? The address Mrs. Harrison provided. Let me see. 847 Maple Street, apartment 2B. I'd never lived on Maple Street. I'd been in the same small house for 10 years. David hung up the phone, and the silence that followed was so loud it hurt. When he looked at Victoria, his face was completely blank, which somehow seemed more frightening than anger would have been. Explain, he said simply. Victoria's calm finally broke. Tears started flowing down her cheeks, but they looked more like panic than real sorrow. David, you have to understand. My parents were about to lose their house. They're old, and my father's medical bills were making them go bankrupt. I just borrowed the money temporarily. Borrowed? I whispered. You mean stole? No. Victoria's voice rose. I was going to pay it back. I just needed time. And the lake house, it's not like you were using it. My family needed a place to stay while they got back on their feet. I felt something crack inside my chest. Not like I was using it. Victoria, I've been working double shifts to afford my medication. I've been eating one meal a day to make my grocery money last. I haven't been able to turn my heat above 60 degrees because I can't afford the electric bill. David was staring at his wife like he'd never seen her before. Victoria, my mother could have died. What if she'd had a medical emergency and couldn't afford treatment? But she didn't. Victoria said desperately, she's fine. She's healthy. My father has diabetes and heart problems. He needed the money more. The lack of care in her words hit me like a physical blow. Fine, healthy. I thought about the nights I'd lay awake, my chest tight with stress, wondering how I'd pay for my next prescription. The times I'd stood in the grocery store, calculator in hand, putting items back because I couldn't afford them. Where is my house now? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Victoria wiped her nose with the back of her hand, her expensive makeup smearing. My parents are living there and my brother's family. They've been renovating it, making improvements. With my money, David said flatly. Victoria nodded sadly. I sank into my chair, feeling suddenly exhausted. For 2 years, I'd told myself that David was too busy to check on me regularly, that his success meant he didn't need to worry about his mother anymore. I'd been proud of his independence, even as I struggled alone. But all this time, he thought he was taking care of me. He thought I was comfortable and safe. Mom, David said, his voice cracking slightly. I'm so sorry. I thought you were okay. I thought you had everything you needed. I looked at my son, this successful man who'd worked so hard to build a better life, and I saw the little boy who used to promise he'd take care of me when he grew up. He tried to keep that promise, but the woman he trusted most in the world had stolen it from both of us. How much? I asked Victoria. How much of my money did you take? She was quiet for a long moment. All of it, she finally whispered. $36,000, plus a house that was probably worth at least $200,000 more. Victoria's family had been living well on money that was meant to keep me from being poor. David stood up slowly, his movements careful and controlled. Victoria, pack your things. I want you out of my house tonight. David, please, she begged, reaching for him. We can fix this. I'll make it right. I'll find a way to pay your mother back. He stepped away from her touch. With what money? You haven't worked a day since we got married. Everything your family has been living on was stolen from my mother. I watched my daughter-in-law fall apart, and I felt nothing. No pity, no satisfaction, just a hollow emptiness where trust used to be. She'd looked me in the eye for 2 years, had sat at this very table, knowing I was struggling while her family lived in luxury at my expense. As Victoria's sobs echoed through my small dining room, I realized that this Thanksgiving would indeed be unforgettable, but not because of the family gathering I'd hoped for. It would be remembered as the day I learned that sometimes the people who smile the brightest are the ones hiding the darkest secrets. After Victoria left that night, crying and begging for forgiveness that neither David nor I could give, my house felt different, quieter but not peaceful. The silence was heavy with unanswered questions and the weight of betrayal that seemed to settle into every corner. David wanted to call his lawyer immediately, but I asked him to wait. Not because I was changing my mind about going forward with this, but because something told me we needed to know the full extent of what Victoria had done before we moved forward. Thieves rarely steal just once, and I had a feeling this went deeper than a house and some monthly payments. Mom, you don't need to do anything, David said as he sat across from me at my kitchen table, his expensive suit wrinkled from the long, awful day. Let me handle everything. You've been through enough. But I shook my head. For 2 years, I'd been the victim of Victoria's lies. I'd been helpless, not knowing, while she slowly stole from me what little safety I might have had. Now I knew the truth, and I wasn't going to sit back and let others handle my business. I need to see it all, I told him. Every document, every bank record, every piece of paper. I need to understand exactly what she did to me. The next morning, after David went home to change clothes and gather documents, I called in sick to work for the first time in 2 years. Mrs. Henderson, my supervisor, was surprised but understanding when I told her I had a family emergency. If only she knew. David returned with boxes of paperwork and his laptop. We spread everything across my small dining table, the same table where Victoria had sat just hours before, pretending to be the concerned daughter-in-law while hiding her crimes. The first document we looked at was the deed to the lake house. My signature was there, clear as day, on a document I'd never seen before. But as I stared at it, something seemed wrong. This isn't how I sign my name, I said, pointing to the signature. Look at the M in Margaret. I always make it with a little loop at the top, but this one is just straight lines. David pulled out his phone and took a picture of the signature, then found an old birthday card I'd signed for him last year. The differences were subtle, but clear once you knew what to look for. She forged your signature, he said, his voice flat with anger. We kept digging. The bank records showed that the monthly payments had been going to an account that was indeed in my name, but at a bank I'd never done business with. Someone had opened an account using my personal information. I need to see this account, I said. David called the bank, but they wouldn't give him information over the phone since he wasn't an account holder. So we drove there together, my hands shaking as I walked into the fancy lobby of First National Bank with my driver's license and Social Security card. The account had been opened 2 years, and 1 month ago, just weeks before the first payment was supposed to go to me. The address on file was 847 Maple Street, apartment 2B, the same address Rebecca had mentioned. The phone number listed wasn't mine either. "Ma'am," the bank representative said, looking confused as she scrolled through the records. "You've never actually been in this branch before, have you?" "No," I said firmly. "I've never been here in my life." She showed us the signature card from when the account was opened. The same fake version of my name, signed by someone who wasn't me. "This is identity theft," the representative said, her voice concerned. "You need to file a police report immediately." But we weren't done yet. David had brought copies of all his money records related to my care. And as we sat in the bank's customer service area, a clearer picture began to appear. The monthly payments were just the beginning. David had also been sending extra money for my medical expenses. Money I'd never seen. $500 when he thought I needed new glasses. $800 for what he believed was dental work. $1,000 last Christmas as a bonus. Every single payment had gone to the fake account. "How much?" I asked, though I was afraid to hear the answer. David's fingers moved across his phone's calculator. His face turned pale. $43,000. Over 2 years, she stole $43,000 from you. I felt dizzy. $43,000 was more money than I'd ever had in my life. It was enough to have changed everything, to have given me safety and comfort in my older years instead of the constant stress of living paycheck to paycheck. We drove to 847 Maple Street next. It was a rundown apartment building on the other side of town, the kind of place with flickering neon signs and broken concrete steps. Apartment 2B was empty with a "for rent" sign in the window. She probably rented it just long enough to set up the fake address, David said, his jaw tight with anger. But I was thinking about something else. "David, how did she get my personal information? My social security number, my date of birth, all the details she'd need to open that account." He was quiet for a moment. "From our house. I keep copies of important family documents in my home office. She would have had access to everything." The betrayal hurt deeper with each new discovery. Victoria hadn't just seen a chance and taken it. She'd planned this carefully, slowly stealing my identity and my money while living in my son's house, eating at his table, pretending to love him. That evening, as we sat in my living room, surrounded by proof of Victoria's crimes, David looked at me with tears in his eyes. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I trusted her completely. I never thought to check that you were receiving the money, because she was the one who suggested I send it in the first place." That detail hit me hard. She suggested it. David nodded sadly. "About 6 months after Dad died, she mentioned how worried she was about you managing on your own. She said it would be a wonderful gesture if I could help with your expenses, especially since business was going so well. She even offered to work with Rebecca to set everything up." I closed my eyes, feeling the full weight of Victoria's trickery. She'd made herself seem like the caring daughter-in-law, worried about her husband's struggling mother, while secretly making sure that every dollar meant for me would end up in her family's pockets. And the lake house, same thing. She said you'd mentioned wanting to live near water, that it would be good for your health and peace of mind. She helped me find the property, talked about the price, handled all the paperwork. Victoria had used my son like a toy, using his love for me against both of us. She'd made him feel generous and caring while slowly robbing me of everything he'd tried to give me. As David gathered up the papers to take to his lawyer, I sat alone in my living room, staring at the walls I'd grown so familiar with over the past 2 years. This small, crowded space with its old furniture and broken air conditioner wasn't supposed to be my reality. I was supposed to be living comfortably in a beautiful house by the lake with enough money to buy my medicines without counting every penny. Instead, Victoria's parents were probably sitting by that lake right now, enjoying their stolen retirement, while I'd been using less of my blood pressure pills and wearing secondhand clothes. But knowing the truth, as painful as it was, felt like the first step toward getting my life back. Victoria had stolen more than money from me. She'd stolen 2 years of safety, of dignity, of the peace of mind that comes with knowing your child is taking care of you. Tomorrow, we'd start the process of getting it all back. But tonight, for the first time in 2 years, I went to bed knowing exactly where I stood. And that knowledge, bitter as it was, felt like power. The morning David's lawyer called with the results of his investigation. I was scrubbing floors at the office building where I'd worked for the past decade. My knees ached against the cold tile, and my hands were raw from the strong cleaning liquids. But I kept working because I needed every dollar from this job. At least, I thought I did. Mrs. Harrison, Mr. Patterson's voice was serious when I called him back during my lunch break. We need to meet immediately. What we found goes far beyond what we first thought. David picked me up after my shift, his face tired from lack of sleep. He'd barely slept since Thanksgiving, putting all his energy into the investigation with the same drive he used for his business deals. But this wasn't business. This was personal, and it was hurting him deeply. At the lawyer's office, we sat across from Mr. Patterson as he laid out a file thick with documents. Victoria didn't just steal from you, Mrs. Harrison. She's been running what amounts to a small-scale fraud operation using your identity. The room seemed to tilt. As he explained, Victoria had used my personal information to open not just the one bank account, but 3 separate accounts at different banks. She'd applied for credit cards in my name, taken out a small loan, and even filed false tax returns claiming me as a dependent while reporting income I'd never earned. The IRS has been trying to contact you about differences in your tax forms, Mr. Patterson continued. They've been sending notices to the fake address. You're currently under investigation for tax evasion. I felt like I was drowning. Tax evasion? But I've filed my taxes honestly every year. We know that now, but the IRS doesn't. Victoria has been reporting that you received the money David sent. Money that you never actually got. From their perspective, you've been hiding income. David's hands were clenched into fists. How much did she steal in total? Mr. Patterson looked through several pages, including the original $43,000, plus extra credit card spending, loan money, and fake tax refunds. We're looking at approximately $78,000. The number hit me like a punch. $78,000. I made $18,000 a year scrubbing floors. Victoria had stolen more than 4 years of my salary. And the house. That's where it gets more complicated. Mr. Patterson said, the property is legally in your name, Mrs. Harrison, based on the forged deed. Victoria's family has been living there, making improvements with the stolen money, and they've actually made the house much more valuable. I thought about Victoria's parents, whom I'd met only twice at family gatherings. They'd seemed like nice people, a little surprised by their daughter's rich way of life, but thankful for her success. Had they known where the money was coming from? Had they known they were living in a house stolen from their son-in-law's mother? Can we get it back? David asked. Yes, but we'll need to involve the police. This isn't just a private matter anymore. This is criminal fraud, identity theft, and tax evasion. Victoria could face serious prison time. I was quiet for a long moment, thinking about the woman who'd sat at my table just days ago, crying and begging for forgiveness. She'd seemed truly sorry, but now I wondered if those tears had been real or just another trick. What about her family? I asked. Her parents? Her brother with the children? Mr. Patterson's face was kind but firm. They'll have to leave the property. If they can prove they didn't know the money was stolen, they might avoid criminal charges, but they can't keep what was bought with stolen money. David was staring out the window, his jaw tight. Where is Victoria now? She's staying with her parents at the lake house, Mr. Patterson said. Our investigator confirmed she's been there since she left your house on Thanksgiving. So, she ran straight to the people who'd been living off my mother's stolen money, David said bitterly. Of course she did. That afternoon, we drove to Lake Morrison. I'd never seen the house that was supposedly mine, and as we pulled into the long driveway, I gasped despite myself. It was beautiful. A large one-story home with big windows looking out over the water, surrounded by old trees and well-kept gardens. This was what David had wanted for me, this peaceful, comfortable place where I could have spent my retirement years watching the sunset over the lake instead of worrying about whether I could afford my next meal. Victoria's father answered the door, his face falling when he saw David and me. Oh, he said quietly. We've been expecting you. Victoria appeared behind him, looking smaller and younger than I'd ever seen her. Her fancy clothes had been replaced with jeans and an old sweater, and her face was puffy from crying. Margaret, she said, her voice barely a whisper. I'm so sorry. I looked at her, this woman who'd smiled at me across countless dinner tables while slowly destroying my money safety, and I felt nothing but cold anger. Are you? I asked. Are you really sorry, Victoria? Or are you just sorry you got caught? She started crying again, but I wasn't moved. I'd seen her tears before, had believed in them, had even felt sorry for her sometimes when David worked long hours, and she seemed lonely. I never meant for it to go this far, she sobbed. It started with just borrowing the first payment to help my parents with their mortgage. I was going to put it back before anyone noticed, but you didn't, David said, his voice like ice. You took more and more. You stole my mother's identity, filed false tax returns, opened credit cards in her name. That's not borrowing, Victoria. That's fraud. Victoria's mother had appeared in the doorway, her face wet with tears. We didn't know, she said desperately. We thought David was just being generous, helping us through a difficult time. Victoria told us he'd insisted on buying us the house. I looked at this older woman, probably close to my age, and I saw true shock and horror in her eyes. She hadn't known. None of them had known except Victoria. The IRS thinks I'm a tax cheat because of what your daughter did. I said quietly, I could go to prison because Victoria filed false returns in my name. Victoria's mother gasped, pressing a hand to her mouth. Oh my God, Victoria, what have you done? But Victoria just kept crying, offering excuses and apologies that meant nothing now. She'd had 2 years to confess, 2 years to make this right, and she'd chosen to dig deeper instead. Mr. Patterson stepped forward with a briefcase full of legal documents. Mrs. Stevens, I'm going to need you and your family to leave this property within 30 days. Everything bought with the stolen money will need to be returned or paid for. As I watched Victoria's family understand the reality of their situation, I felt something I hadn't expected. Relief. Not satisfaction. Not revenge. Just relief that the truth was finally out in the open. The police will be here tomorrow to arrest Victoria, Mr. Patterson continued. I'd recommend she turn herself in willingly. Victoria looked up at David with desperate eyes. Please don't let them arrest me. I'll pay everything back. I promise. I'll get a job. I'll work day and night. David shook his head, sadly. With what skills, Victoria? You've never worked a day in your life. You don't even know how to work. All you know how to do is take. As we left the lake house, I turned back for one last look at the place that should have been my home for the past 2 years. Soon it would be, but it felt empty now, ruined by the knowledge of how Victoria had stolen it from me. Mom, David said as we drove away, I'm going to make sure you never need anything again. I'm going to take care of you the way I should have been doing all along. I patted his hand gently. You were taking care of me, honey. It's not your fault that Victoria stole what you gave me. But as we drove back toward my small, cramped house, I knew that everything was about to change. Victoria would face the results of her crimes, and I would finally get the safety and comfort that David had always intended for me to have. The argument was over. Now came justice. The divorce papers were finalized on a gray Tuesday in February, 3 months after that very sad Thanksgiving dinner. I sat in the courthouse hallway beside David as his lawyer came out of the courtroom with news that Victoria had signed everything without fighting. She'd already been sentenced to 18 months in prison for fraud and identity theft, and fighting the divorce would have only added legal costs she couldn't afford. "It's done," Mr. Patterson said, sitting down beside us. "The marriage is over. All things bought with stolen money go back to their rightful owners. Mrs. Harrison, you now legally own the lake house, and all the money in the fake accounts has been frozen until it can be fully returned." David let out a long breath. What about her family? They left the property last week. Her parents moved in with her brother for a short time, and they've been surprisingly cooperative. I think they're truly horrified by what Victoria did. I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. Relief that this bad dream was finally ending, but sadness for the people who were also hurt. Victoria's parents were innocent victims, too, in their own way. They'd lost their home and their savings, all because their daughter had chosen to steal instead of asking for help. Honestly, the weeks that followed were a blur of paperwork and changes. David focused completely on making things right with the same strong effort he'd once used to build his business. He hired a team of accountants to fix Victoria's fake tax forms, worked with the IRS to clear my name, and personally watched over every detail of putting the lake house back in my name. But the most important change was in David himself. The successful businessman who'd been too busy for regular phone calls became a son who stopped by every few days, who called just to check on me, who insisted on taking me to doctor's appointments and grocery shopping. "You don't have to follow me everywhere, honey," I told him one afternoon as he helped me pack the few things I wanted to keep from my old house. "I'm not going anywhere." He stopped folding one of my blankets, his hands still on the soft fabric. "Mom, I missed 2 years of your life because I was silly enough to trust Victoria completely. I'm not missing any more." I understood his guilt, even though I didn't think he deserved it. Victoria had been a master at controlling people, using his love for me to hide her crimes. But I also understood that trust, once broken so completely, takes time to rebuild. Even trust in yourself. Moving into the lake house felt unreal. The place was beautiful, but it carried the weight of everything that had happened. Victoria's family had taken good care of it. I had to admit, the gardens were well kept. The house was clean and updated, and they'd even added a screened porch overlooking the water that I fell in love with right away. But it felt like moving into someone else's life rather than getting my own back. "We can change anything you want," David said as we walked through the rooms together. "New furniture, different paint colors, whatever would make it feel like home to you." I liked his thoughtfulness, but I wasn't sure new curtains would make me forget